and we're picking up today, is that in 1929, the Depression hits and the stock market crashes. That'll bring on the Depression, right? And so the question for us is, what I'm going to guide this first half of today's session is, why did the Texas economy collapse so quickly during the 1930s, the early 1930s? Things you're going to see here in a second are going to fall apart fast. The wheels are going to come off of this bus about as quickly as possible. And the question is, why? Why do things get so bad so very quickly? Because I'll tell you, Texans who experienced it couldn't quite figure it out. That's something that we're going to see here. They couldn't quite understand why and how this was happening to them so very quickly. And they tried ignoring it, and that didn't work very well. All right. So let's talk about that. Why did things fall apart so quickly? And we got to start really with the stock market crash in October of 29. And I know you guys probably know a little bit about this, but I want to give you guys some mechanics because I think it's really important for our students to understand how this happened. And even my students at the college level sometimes have a hard time grasping it. So the stock market was red hot in the 1920s, all right? And a lot of that was because people were investing who had never invested in the stock market before. And it seemed like you could just make money by dumping it into the stock market, and then things would keep going up higher and higher in terms of prices. And it's one of those situations where it seems like the good times are just going to keep on going forever. I'll give you an example. So the radio was a new invention in the 19-teens and early 20s, and people started buying radios everywhere. So the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, its stock price, listen to these numbers. RCA's stock price went from $85 a share to $420 a share in just 1 year in 1928. $85 to $420, right? It's an enormous profit. So everyone's investing in that. It's just making money over money over money. And so people started who could do it and knew what the stock market was. So this is not a cotton farmer in rural Texas, but they'd take their money and just pour it into the stock market. And then they would borrow more money from the banks. Banks were lending people money to invest in the stock market. Can you imagine that today? Like people getting money from the bank to like literally just, I'm going to go put this in the stock market. And the bank was thrilled with it because they were going to make money. The person was going to make money. It was all going really well. The good times were going to go on forever was the idea. Except they never do. There's ups and then there's downs. And over the long haul, it's a good part in terms of the American economy. But the economy got so overheated by the late 1920s that when a few major players decided, maybe I should pull back a little bit and started selling, it created this massive crash in the late 1929, starting in October. And it wasn't just one day thing. It was actually several days, several weeks even in October and November when things started falling apart in the stock market. So here we see, this is Wall Street, and panic is afoot on Wall Street as things are collapsing because the amount of money that just disappeared with the stock market crash is astronomical. $40 billion disappeared. That is in 1929 dollars. $40 billion just disappears overnight. And stock prices start collapsing in a massive way. U.S. Steel, you can see right here, it goes from $262 a share to $22. Just craters, right? General Motors goes from $73 a share to $8. I mean, it's like Tesla stock, which is incredibly expensive today, going to like $40. Like it just goes from these very high levels to just down through the floor. 80% of the entire Rockefeller fortune just disappears. 4 out of every $5 might as well have just been set on fire and goes away, right? Absolutely astounding. Now, that's bad, right, on its own. But the reason it collapses the economy is because it has a ripple effect. Like, yes, stock market collapsed, right? People who had money in the stock market lost it, and that's really sad for them. But how does this affect a bigger field in American history? Well, it starts affecting everybody because when the stock market collapsed, people got spooked and they went to their bank to get their money. And this created what are called bank runs, all right? Which we don't have anymore because we now have FDIC insurance, where if things go bad, the federal government says that your savings and deposits are insured up to, I think it's $250,000 now. There was no such thing as FDIC insurance at this time. So that meant that if your bank collapsed because of the stock market crash or because other people are running to get their money out, if your bank collapsed and your money's gone, you're not getting it back. So people freaked out. This is a bank run you're seeing right here. People really ran to the bank to get their money out. And when everybody did that all at once, it was the surest way to destroy a bank. Everything collapsed as a result of it. And so people's banks literally started collapsing all over the country, right? Here's a good example. Texas National Bank, that's a bank in Fort Worth, all right, had a bank run and they lost $5 million basically overnight. $5 million. They only had $6 million on deposit. So when they lost that much money, they couldn't open their doors anymore and they shut down. That was a real problem because not only is $5 million gone and that bank is shut down, but Texas National Bank was a reserve bank, which means it was big enough that other little banks all around it usually put their deposits in this big reserve bank because it could hold a lot more and it was a lot more secure. So when Texas National Bank went down, it didn't just go down by itself. It took down a lot of other little banks. A good example is a bank in Aubrey, Texas, which I live in Denton. Aubrey is just south of where I live. I actually drive through it to pick up my kids from school every day. And back in 1930, it had 439 people. And they had their own adorable little bank, the First State Bank of Aubrey, and they kept all their money in the Texas National Bank in Fort Worth. So when Texas National went down, so did the State Bank of Aubrey. They lost $85,000, which today doesn't sound like a lot of money. That is all the savings of every person in Aubrey, Texas, all of it. And it all disappears overnight. And people in Aubrey, these are not people who are investing in the stock market. But my point is, it quickly, what happened in the stock market started affecting their lives because everything was interconnected with the American economy. And these two banks between them lost the equivalent of $83 million in today's money. All right. All at once, all at the end, when the stock market collapses, as these bank runs start taking down banks across the United States. And that's why the Great Depression spreads out so quickly in so many different directions and becomes so devastating. Because when banks collapsed, it pretty much collapsed the entire economy. Because once banks are collapsing, people lost their money, and then the banks can't lend any more money. And it's kind of like taking the oil out of your car engine. You can't run anymore. There no longer is that money circulating in the system that keeps everything moving. Once the banks collapse, the entire economy starts collapsing, and then things just start getting bad to worse, as my son used to say, worser. All right. Now, for most people in Texas, when they heard about Wall Street collapsing and they heard about the stock market crash, their reaction was, that's basically somebody else's problem. And in fact, most people in Texas didn't know what the stock market really was. There was actually a poll done of people in East Texas asking them about the stock market, and most of them, the majority of them, did not know even what it is. So for most Texans, they're looking at this saying, well, that's a problem for people in New York, maybe, but not us here in Texas. You know, our money is in real things like cotton and oil. And one historian, one of my favorite historians, a guy named Mike Campbell, it's called this whistling past the graveyard, because they're hoping that this isn't going to affect them. But it does, because the entire US economy is deeply integrated into itself. We see that with the banks collapsing all around us, and now we're going to see it with what happens to the Texas economy. Because here's the reality. When the stock market collapses and banks are collapsing, people stop buying things and clothes. They stop buying textiles of all sorts. That means they also stop buying anything made of cotton. And that is one of the two major things Texas has to sell. So as soon as this crash starts happening, the demand for cotton starts going down pretty rapidly. And that's really bad news for Texas farmers. Now, some people recognize this very quickly and say, we need to do something. There's the governor of Louisiana, Huey Long, right, who's famous on so many reasons. This is the kingfish guy, who says we in Louisiana need to save our cotton economy. And so he tries to get farmers to stop growing as much to try to bring the supply down to stabilize prices. And he tells the governor of Texas, a guy named Ross Sterling, you guys should do the same thing. And you should definitely stop Texas farmers from growing quite as much cotton because that'll bring down the supply, which will raise prices or at least stabilize them in some way. But Ross Sterling and the Texas government wanted nothing to do with regulating the economy. Even though things are collapsing, he's saying, we don't need to do that. We're just going to let things ride out, whatever's going to happen. And that's important to understand. And I always emphasize that with my students is that they don't know what's coming. It's something we often forget in history, and we tend to forget when we're talking about these things, that they don't know what's coming next. Ross Sterling has no idea how big an economic storm this really is. And so he does nothing. And so what happens is the cotton economy collapses in spectacular fashion, right? Goes from 28 cents a pound down to about 5 cents a pound pretty rapidly. In 1931, Texas will then start trying to get farmers to stop growing cotton the way Huey Long had proposed. But by then it's basically too late and none of it works. And so the cotton economy collapses. So half of Texas economy just goes cratering to the floor at the very beginning, right? But wait, you say, there's still oil. And that's what a lot of Texans say. It's like, we still got oil. We're still good. We still produce a lot of oil and there's a lot of demand. But there's two problems with that. One, people stop buying things. They also stop buying things that need oil and gasoline, right? So demand starts going down pretty quickly for oil anyway. Then something happens is that Texas discovers even more oil in 1930, right after the Depression has begun. In fact, it's October of 1930. So literally 1 year after the stock market crash, there's a guy who's this is his picture here, C.M. Joyner, whose nickname was Dad Joyner. He comes into East Texas and he helped discover and bring in the find at Longview Kilgore in East Texas. All right, there's Dad Joyner right there, standing there in the middle. And they find a massive quantity of oil in East Texas. I mean, it's a huge strike. It's actually much bigger than the Spindletop strike, all right? But here's the problem. It's a year in after the stock market collapse. Demand for oil is already going down, and now they found a huge amount of oil. And they start pumping it out in massive numbers. And people come pouring into East Texas as fast as they can to find more oil and to pump out as much as they can. And so Texas starts producing a huge amount of oil. And what does that do? It increases the supply at the same moment demand is collapsing. What does that mean? That means the price of oil goes through the floor. I mean, it absolutely craters as fast as you can possibly imagine. The oil goes from $1 a barrel down to 5 cents a barrel. Think about that. $1 a barrel down to 5 cents a barrel. It's like today, oil going from like $150 a barrel down to, $2. All right. It absolutely craters. Things go through the floor. And there's all these fights that happen in East Texas as the state ends up sending in the National Guard to try to stop oil production in the oil fields to try to stabilize things. Right. And so Ross Sterling here, he ends up using the state government to try to, a little too late, put brakes on this problem. But by this point, things have gone out of control and the prices collapsed. And so the two pillars of the Texas economy, cotton cultivation and oil production, have both collapsed. And they're taking down the entire Texas economy with them, all right? And so things start collapsing pretty much all over the place when it comes to the Texas economy. And it starts enveloping the lives of average Texans very quickly. And so people start losing their jobs, they start losing their farms, they start losing all the ways that they make an economic living and find themselves in very difficult economic circumstances, right? By the time you get to 1933, there's over 105,000 Texas families on some sort of relief welfare of some sort, which is 7% of the state's population, right? A lot of people, but it gets even bigger. The next year, that number has more than doubled, 246,000 families, representing about 1 million people, or 13% of the state's population. So you can see, not only is this happening fast, but it's growing exponentially in terms of speed and its effect on people's lives, right? And so Texas, the collapse that's happening in Texas is really a window into what's happening across the entire United States. I'm going to give you guys some numbers that I use with my students that really is effective because they have to sit there and think about what these numbers mean, right? By 1932, right? There's between 1 and 2 million people who are homeless in the United States, who don't have a home, have lost their home in most cases, and have been shuttered by the economic collapse all around them. Give you an example, and this guy isn't homeless, but of the collapse. William Durant, he's one of the founders of GM. This guy, here, I'll give you this picture here. This guy is a founder of General Motors. He loses all of his money, all of it, and he ends up running a bowling alley in Flint, Michigan. Right? That's how big and bad this collapse really is. That's taking down someone like William Durant. Right? I'll give you another great example. U.S. Steel, right? One of the biggest, most important industries of its time, right? This is Andrew Carnegie's operation. In 1929, before the Depression, it employed almost 250,000 full-time workers. By 1932, it had exactly 0 full-time employees. So you can see the unemployment in effect, right? That 250,000 people just from this one company are literally all out of work because everything collapsed, because nobody's buying steel. No one's buying any of these raw goods anymore. And so everything just falls apart. For those of us who lived through the Cold War, I think this is a very powerful, telling stat. When the Soviet Union advertised that it needed more skilled workers for Russian factories, it received more than 100,000 applications from the United States. That's all right. So things are falling to pieces. And then Mother Nature just decides to kick Texas in the teeth, because this is also the era of the Dust Bowl, right? The Great Dust Bowl. And you can see in this map, it doesn't just affect Texas, but it affects the northern Texas panhandle, and then, parts of New Mexico, eastern Colorado, which is the plains, and Kansas and Oklahoma, right? It's this big Great Plains region out there. And when it happened, there's a long ecological story here, but what you can tell your students is, we put a lot of ranches out on the panhandle in the, post-Civil War era, Charles Goodnight and folks like that. So we're grazing a lot of that land pretty heavily. And then in the late 19th, early 20th century, they tried to sell a lot of that land to farmers, and essentially lying to them that there was more rainfall in the rest of the 100th meridian than there actually was. But the point of all of this is that through overgrazing and over farming, right, that grasslands region on the plains up there north in the panhandle of Texas had basically been eradicated, and there wasn't enough grass there anymore to hold on to the dirt. Does that make sense? You need enough grass there to hold on to the dirt. And when it's been overgrazed and overfarmed, you don't have that. And the dirt is just kind of out in the wind, and it gets sucked up and thrown up by winds up into the atmosphere. Right? From 1931, these dates are important. From 1931 to 1934, it stopped raining. All right, this is what creates the Dust Bowl, because when it stopped raining and you don't have that sod on the dirt, suddenly all this dirt and dust gets pulled up into the atmosphere, all right, and it's sucked up into the sky, and then it turns these massive dust and dirt storms that then come rolling through parts of the panhandle. You can see it right there in the background, and it'll come in like a massive storm. You can see these guys, you can see these two guys right here in this image right here. They're just standing out there. It's this massive storm coming in. It's all dirt and dust. And they come through, and it would literally come over and just bury farms and homes and houses and people's lives, right? This is an aftermath of one of these great dust storms that absolutely destroyed people's homes in the panhandle, right? As though things aren't hard enough with the Depression, then you got the Great Dust Bowl, and that really breaks the back of farmers and a lot of ranchers too in the panhandle of Texas during this time period. So you have this massive out-migration from Texas. All right, you can see this map right here, people leaving the panhandle and going westward toward California. For those of you who've read Grapes of Wrath, right, that's this story. And there's about 200,000 people who leave Texas during this time period and abandon their farms, abandon sometimes their ranches, and make their way west. And that's kind of a metaphor, I think, for what the Depression does to Texas. It breaks the back of cotton farming. It breaks the back of all these older ways that the state made its money and its living, and it will make it possible for Texas to rebuild itself during the New Deal and World War II that will come later. All right? My point in all this is to say the Depression came in like a massive storm, like one of these great dust storms, and just buried Texans and brought them to their knees. People who hadn't, who'd never been wanting for food or supplies or clothing for themselves or their families suddenly find themselves unable to feed their own children, right? So you see these images like this one here. These are real people and who's having real lives dealing with all of this stuff. And I see these faces of these two kids right here. But I identify with the mom in this picture because I'm a parent and I imagine what it must be like to be wondering how you're going to feed your children in all of these circumstances. Texans are facing that for the very first time as the Depression descends on them in all of its fury, and they're trying to figure out what can they do? How can they deal with this? So let me pause there, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jay Ferguson, who's going to give you guys some resources to use in the classroom. And I see Brittany just put a Dallas Morning News article into the chat. If you guys can keep putting stuff in there for each other, that'd be fantastic. But Jay, take it over and I'll join you guys back in a second.
Okay, so what I tried to do on this given unit was I'm thinking from the seventh grader's mind about what to do. So the way I teach this unit, I have a fun activity. It's called the stock market game. Some of you may have it. Michelle has a varied version from mine. I can't say it's mine. I would love to share it with you. It's one of the things we would love to give you guys, but it's not original. I can't tell you where it came from, but if you want it, it's really fun. It truly teaches that teak about the Great Depression. It kind of sets up the whole aspect of leading into that depression. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with this activity. So the lesson plan, we have a hook exercise, we got a primary source about the Great Depression, and then an exit ticket. And what I wanted to do on the hook exercise is talk about what Dr. Torget was talking about, take a little bit of the historical context that he provided us tonight, and really just kind of from a seventh grader's perspective, discuss what was going on, discuss about the borrowing of money or buying stocks on a fraction, and then using that stock as collateral, and trying to give a presentation to a seventh grader what it is like to buy stocks from that point. Talk a little bit about the collapse of the oil or of cotton, as well as overproduction of oil. So that was kind of my goal on this one, just a quick little hook exercise to show what could potentially happen in the stock market. Then I wanted to move over to something different, showing a pictorial version of the Great Depression. And in the speaker notes, what I tried to do is I used Dorothea Lange. I went to a lot of the New Deal websites, FBR's National Library as well too, and used a lot of what they're providing, just so we can give our students a pictorial viewpoint. This video has come straight from FDR's Presidential Library. It's very short and sweet, kind of gives us a quick introduction to it. But it kind of goes through various images. We've all seen a lot of these images. And I tried to take the historical context that Dr. Torget's talked about, bring it into the classroom along with images that we've all seen before. And notice I have teacher context to students. So I kind of left this open, and Michelle and I talked about this at length. How should we do this? Should we tell you exactly what to say, or could you just use this as a picture reveal? I also have information about the Fort Worth Bank that closed, the First Texas National Bank, as well as a news clipping from the Aubrey Bank that closed its doors as well too. And it kind of goes through, political cartoons. It really wanted to focus on the human toll of the Depression, and really wanted students to kind of see what red lines, unemployment lines, giving a little bit of perspective for African Americans, children in Texas, as well as like I said, Dorothea Lange's photography that we've all seen. And a lot of these quotes are directly from her. These are her notes. And then we also wanted to move on through. I wanted to put a Mexican-American slice on this. This actually I discovered this, and I was really pretty pumped about it. This is from mysanantonio.com, 150 years. That shows the perspective. Excuse me, my cat decides to come in. Technical error, I apologize. And ultimately just showed the living conditions, and then how our population was migratory because of this. and really just kind of, I went to Dr. Torget's presentation and tried to incorporate as much as I possibly could with a historical context. And then I have a graphic organizer for the students. And Michelle and I kind of went around and around with this, what's going to be the best method for us to do this. And the idea is just maybe come up with a key characteristic that you want to teach, and then allow the students to fill in that and what's the connection. And then the last thing I wanted to do is talk about, I discovered American Life Histories through the Federal Writers Project. And if you don't know about this, this is a project that's through the United States Work Progress. It basically employs historians, teachers, writers, librarians, and other white collar workers to produce some form of local history or oral history. This one is called Begging Reduced to a System. This is only page 1. This is a 9-page oral account that this individual took of what I assume, based on what I can see, is a principle of these 4 children, the Garrett children, who have been missing from school for the past 5 weeks. And the principal isn't too concerned about their health. He describes them, but he's more concerned about why they miss school and why they're asking for free lunch. So I felt like that was very telling of the attitudes, I would say, in there. So we've got a couple exit ticket questions. And again, this whole lesson is designed to be broken up, incorporated into your existing lessons. Even the primary source PowerPoint, break it up, break it apart. One things that I've learned, I know Michelle does as well too, we don't take this entire lesson and use it in its entirety. I break it up and incorporate it to what I'm already teaching right now. So with that, I am done. Let me stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Dr. Torget. And if you have any questions, throw them in the chat for me, and I'll be glad to answer them for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks for those resources. I say thank you, Brittany, for sharing the resources you've been sharing in the chat, which I'm going to be utilizing myself. Okay. Well, let's dive back into our story. That story. Okay, so as the Depression is descending upon Texans, whether they like it or not, the question I use with my students is sort of my guiding essential question when I'm talking about this in class is, how did Texans try to cope with the onset of the Depression? Because I always try to put my students in the place of people who lived through this at the time period. And I think that's something that was coming up in the chat just a minute ago, is that's, I think, such a powerful teaching technique, and I know you guys use it in your classroom. It's just making your students think about what it would be like to have experienced these things, all right? And then, in the most frustrating way, asking why didn't any of the things work that these Texans tried as the Depression is descending upon them, right? And these visuals are just so powerful. I use them in my classroom to great effect. I mean, people react so strongly to these things about, like this image of this woman here, who has everything she's got, which doesn't look like a whole lot, thrown in the back of a little pickup truck. She's got a little baby right here on the side of the road. You can just imagine what she must be feeling and thinking as everything around her is collapsing. And obviously she's been forced from her home and is trying to make a way and make a living and trying to get away. Texans are dealing with this. They're trying their very best, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to deal with it. What are Texas leaders doing? Mostly saying, suck it up. It'll be fine. You'll be fine. Just stop complaining and you'll be just fine. This sort of attitude was sort of very widespread in the early 1930s, which you would think doesn't make any sense because you and I know what's coming, but none of these people, again, know what's coming. And a lot of them think this is just going to be a short thing. We're not going to have to worry about this. One of my favorite examples of this, there's a newspaper man from Amarillo by the name of Henry Ainsley, who put together a book called I Like the Depression. And what he was saying in this is his little book here is that, you know, I was going too far, too fast in the 1920s. Things were just, you know, so nonstop. But now that the Depression has hit, I have more time on my hands to spend time with my wife and my kids, and that's great. So I'm going to do my very best to be a better person, is what he said. And the Depression is going to help me do that. I'm gonna spend more time with my friends. I'm gonna eat more plain food. I'm gonna be more considerate. He's basically just trying to put the best spin he can on the fact that he no longer has a job. Good. I'm all about positive. Sounds great. Problem with that is it didn't resonate very well broadly with regular Texans, right? And I think this one woman's response to Ainsley is a pretty good example of how a lot of people felt. She's saying, she's responding to this book, I Like the Depression, and she says, I can safely say that anyone who says he likes the Depression has not had starvation staring him in the face. I don't like to see others go hungry while I have plenty. Therefore, I don't like the Depression. Right? But Texas leaders, I mean, they didn't know what to do. I think that's what a lot comes down to. They didn't know what to do. They didn't have anything that they could really do with it. So they said, just fuck up, people, it'll be fine. Governor Sterling, he's saying in October 31, the problem, as he says it, is that our people, Texans, seem to have just lost faith. And that quality of heart and mind so essential to the solution of those grave problems that sometimes appear to threaten the perpetuity of our institutions. What he's basically saying is like, the real problem is you guys have kind of given up here. We'll be okay. We'll be fine. We just need to have positive thinking, right? Like, see this kid here? He's got a smile on his face. It's the Depression, but he's good. And there was, I mean, I'm not trying to make light of it. There's a lot of Texas leaders who were acting as though if you just pretend it's not happening, things will turn out fine. Just stop being sad and you'll be happy and it'll be good, right? I'll give you one of my favorite examples. I live in Denton, all right? And the mayor of Denton in January of 1930 declared that the next month, February, would be Prosperity Month, when citizens should only have optimistic conversations and start talking about prosperity, right? That'll solve things if we're just talking optimistically, right? I want to point out to you guys that it was right at this moment, early 1930, when the bank in Fort Worth and the Aubrey Bank both collapsed right around Denton, right? And so the mayor of Denton, he said, we have reason to expect better days just ahead and the reason we can expect this is by each and every one of us doing our best to dispel gloom and pessimism. Just be positive and we'll think our way through this whole thing, right? But here's the problem. That didn't work. You can ignore reality all you want. Reality's not going away. And the reality in this situation is the economy had collapsed. Cotton has gone through the floor, so has oil. And that's employing most Texans in some capacity. And so unemployment all over the place is a big problem. Farmers losing their farms is a big problem. And you can scream all you want, as this billboard does, that America's got the best standard of living and there's no way like the American way. You're still unemployed. Still can't feed your family. And there's no real way around that. So you're looking for someone to blame, aren't you? Yeah, you probably are. And a lot of Texans were. They came up with all kinds of people to blame. They blamed speculators in the stock market, which that makes sense because the average Texan was not involved in the stock market. So they're mad at those fat cats in New York and whoever else was putting their money in those sort of places, and that had caused problems. But the reality was the stock market crash had not caused the Depression. It had just been the first domino to fall in this economic collapse that had really been brought on by the banks falling down as fast as they possibly could. So who else are you going to blame once it's been a year past the stock market collapse? Immigrants. Let's blame immigrants. This was a very popular explanation in Texas. There were rumors, which were completely untrue and inaccurate, that the number of jobs that were taken were the exact number of immigrants who had come in from Mexico. So it must be Mexicans who are causing this problem by coming into the United States. Also, patently not true, but a widespread explanation, right? People like to blame taxes because they didn't like paying them anyway, probably, but they're like, we're overtaxed. That's the reason that this economic problem is happening. And if we just got rid of taxes, we wouldn't be having this depression. Also wildly inaccurate and devoid of any actual knowledge of economics as they work, but it was a popular thing. You want to know one of the biggest explanations that Texans came up with to blame the Depression on? This is surprising to most people. Women. A large number of Texans blamed women for getting jobs and that they were taking jobs that should have gone to men. And so there was a broad sense that there were way too many women in the workforce, and they were taking jobs away from men. There was a giant backlash against women for this reason, blaming them for the Depression. In San Antonio is a good example. The Board of Education made it official policy that they would no longer hire women to be teachers. They were only going to hire men, no matter what background they actually had in education. And if a woman who was teaching in San Antonio got married, that was good enough to get her fired, because if she's married, she should not have to have a job. And so that's the argument that San Antonio school district makes at this time, right? Women were not actually to blame for the Great Depression. I'll make that very clear, right? The Great Depression, again, is this massive storm that overtakes everywhere, including Texas. So you can look every which direction, you can blame everyone you want. Depression, reality is still coming, and it comes harsh for Texans, all right? You're in these lines for coffee and donuts for the unemployed in places like Dallas or Houston or Austin or San Antonio, trying to feed yourself, feed your family, try to find some sort of way of supporting yourself. And the question I always ask my students, and I highly recommend this in your classroom, is have your students walk through the question of what would you do if this was you? What would you do in this circumstance and this situation? To whom would you turn, right? I ask this of my students, and my students, when I ask, like, who do they turn to? They always say government. I'm like, no, they didn't. That was not the first place that people turn to. Like if the economy collapses, most people don't go straight for that. Most people go to their family and friends, their parents or their siblings or whomever, and ask for help. The problem with that's what most people did in Texas. They quickly turned to family and friends and people they were related to in the most of the time. But the Depression, as this massive storm, those dust bowl storms coming in, just buried everybody. So you're out of work, but so's your dad, and so's your uncle, and so's your cousins, and so's your whomever. So that didn't work. And so where do people turn to next? Well, they turned usually to charitable organizations and churches, which up until the 1930s were the main groups that would help with disasters and tending to the poor and things like that. It was mostly left to private organizations, usually religious organizations. But all those places got overwhelmed immediately. And that's kind of the theme here, is that every time people turn to an entity to help, it got destroyed by the massiveness of the Depression. So your friends and family can't do it, help you. The local churches can't do it. The local governments can't do it because they don't have any money. Houston shut off half of its streetlights in 1932 because they just didn't have enough money for it. Beaumont in 1934 turned off all their streetlights, and they ended up closing half their schools because they just didn't have any money to keep them running. All right. And so eventually you go through family, friends, churches, local governments, and they make their way up the chain up to state government. There's not much the state can do, right? What people do is they turn to the governor, and Ross Sterling gets thrown out of office, and they re-elect Ma Ferguson, talked about a week ago, who got elected governor of Texas in 1924 as the first woman elected in her own right. She and her husband, James Ferguson, had a very checkered couple of years in the 1920s, and they'd been fairly corrupt and selling pardons, and they'd been thrown out of office in the late 1920s. Well, Texans turned back to them in 1932 saying, please do something. It's kind of a desperation kind of thing. But the reality is the state has no capacity to deal with a problem on this scale. They just don't. They don't have any resources to deal with it. Ma Ferguson gets into office, and they try to do things like legalize sports gambling. Okay, go to the races, but that's not going to bring enough revenue into the state to deal with the absolute collapse of society on every level. So the state government can't really do anything. All right. While all that's happening, the Depression's not getting better. That's the thing. Every time we talk about this, it's like those infomercials at night. They still have those anymore. But wait, there's more. Except an infomercial but wait, there's more is a good thing. Here it's but wait, there's more. It got worse. All right, unemployment rates just keep going up. I mean, in 1929, when all this began, unemployment was at a paltry 3.2%. Right, but by 1933, unemployment hits 25%. A quarter of the workforce is out of work. I mean, that's just astounding to even consider, right? So by 1933, unemployment's at 25%. That's an overwhelming percentage. Texas is taking it on the chin every which direction. And my point in this is that, like, look at this line of people, right? Those people are in line for food and coffee and whatever opportunities they can possibly get. These are hardworking people who've done their best, who've played by the rules, who have tried their very best in society, and through no fault of their own, everything has collapsed around them. And they can't take care of themselves. They can't take care of their spouses. They can't take care of their children. And my point in telling you that is that there's an emotional aspect to the Great Depression that is hard to explain, and you can't really put it in exact numbers like 25% unemployment. But it's something important for our students to understand, that there's an emotional aspect of like feeling helpless in this moment and not knowing what to do and not knowing where to turn and feeling like everything's crashing around you at all times. And I'll give you an example of that. I love this image because I think it shows a lot of the desperation on both the mom and the dad's faces here that they're coping with in a place like Texas. So the story I always tell my students to illustrate this kind of emotional aspect is about my grandfather. And I'll give you the really short version. But my grandfather was what my mom liked to call an old school man, just to say he was not about emotions, didn't want to talk about his emotions. He was not a huggy grandpa. Like when he came to visit, you tried to stay away from him because he might smack you if you got too close, right? It's just not the friendliest grandpa. My other grandpa, very warm guy, but this guy, not so much. And I remember when grandpa came to visit one time when I was, I think I was 9 years old. And he came to visit, and I remember it was Saturday morning, and I was sitting in the kitchen. This is in the 1980s, so I was eating the biggest bowl of sugar cereal that was possible, I'm sure. And Grandpa was sitting across from me, but that was okay because my mom was at the table, and they were talking, and I'm just eating my cereal. Well, the phone rings. Now, back then, you had to go walk to the phone against the wall because it wasn't on your hip. And my mom leaves, and it's just me and grandpa. And I'm kind of scared and I don't know what to do. So I just sort of like start talking to him. And in social studies, we've been talking about, I don't know how, but we've been talking about the Great Depression. And I asked him about the Great Depression. Like, do you know anything about this? I was just trying to make conversation. And he said, yeah. And he, for the first time in my life, opened up to me and started talking to me. And then he started telling me about his experiences. He lost his job. His dad lost his job. They couldn't afford to feed themselves. He was ended up on the street, just selling anything he could to make a living and feed his family. And then in the middle of all that, he started crying. And I'll tell you, there was nothing more alarming when you're 9 years old and your grandpa, who never shows emotion, suddenly crying in front of you. Like my mom came back and I'm like, I didn't break grandpa. I'm sorry, mom. But my point in saying all that is that it was that emotionally terrifying and difficult that many decades later, it still brought back this wellspring of emotion that he ended up crying, right? That's how powerful this was as an experience and terrifying it was. Now, by the time everything had collapsed up to the state level, people started looking to the national government in Washington, D.C. to do something, right? And the president of the time, Herbert Hoover here, hasn't gotten a lot of love since then from either historians or the public about his reaction to the Great Depression. Because Hoover's reaction to all this happening is like, well, that's tough, but we'll get through it, and we're definitely not going to help anybody. All right. So here's a good Hoover quote to illustrate that. This is Hoover talking. He says, the government should not support the people because helping them only weakens the sturdiness of our national character. So he's basically saying, well, I'm sorry, but that's tough for you. I'm not going to do anything about it. And that didn't resonate well with Americans who had lost everything despite working hard, who couldn't feed their families no matter what they were doing. And so you have homeless camps, you have homeless people building shacks, having lost their homes or their farms. You have the growth of this phenomenon known as Hoovervilles, these little shanty towns outside of cities where people were gathering, and this sort of angst and anger is gathering too. But what's really gathering is this sort of sense of like, we need to do something. This seems to be stretching off into the horizon in a way we can't deal with. And we've got to find some way of dealing with all of these problems. I don't know, hope for the future that could possibly give us some sort of direction to go. All right. So in 1932, there's another election, and Hoover, which this always astounds me, he runs for re-election. If I were him, I would have just dropped the mic and walked off the stage because this isn't going to go well. But Hoover runs for re-election in 1932 as the Republican candidate, obviously, and his opponent is a guy named Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, right? Former governor of New York, rising star in the Democratic Party. And whereas Hoover is saying, yeah, I mean, good luck, you guys, we'll get through this. It'll be fine. We'll just have to suck it up and deal with it for a little while. FDR comes in and says, I'm going to do something because I'm going to offer Americans a new deal. And you might ask yourself, well, what is the new deal that you're offering us, FDR? Well, FDR didn't explain that. He just said, it's going to be a new deal, which is obviously better than the old deal. So whatever the new deal is, I'm going to do it. What he said is, I'm going to remember the forgotten man at the bottom of the economic pyramid. I'm going to help people. I'm going to do something. Literally all he said is, I'm going to try to do something. And that was more than Hoover was doing. So when the 1932 presidential election happens, everybody votes for Roosevelt. I mean, this map's pretty dramatic, I think. You can see in Texas, I mean, Texas is so blue, it is purple. That's how heavily they vote for Roosevelt and the Democratic Party in 1932, right? The Electoral College washes out a lot of the variation here, but you can see it's just a landslide for Roosevelt. And that's a good example of just how much this economic storm had devastated the whole country. And so everybody's looking to do something. And that's what Roosevelt has promised. I will do something, right? And he's counting on Texans to do that something. So the man who ran as Roosevelt's vice presidential nominee is a Texan, John Nance Garner. And that was important for Roosevelt because what Roosevelt knew is that when he got into office, he's going to do something. He's got to get a lot of legislation passed in the United States Congress. If he's going to do that, he needs some congressmen or people who are in the Congress who have a lot of influence and who have a lot of seniority there. And there was really nobody in the US Congress who had more seniority than some of the politicians from Texas. There's a lot of complicated reasons for that. Texas was a one-party state. But the short version is Roosevelt knew he was going to rely on Texans like John Nance Garner and then later Sam Rayburn to try to get things passed because Texas had an enormous amount of political influence in the United States Congress. And so Roosevelt brings Texans in to his administration. And so that matters because when Roosevelt was inaugurated in 1933, at the height of the Depression, when unemployment's hitting 25%, he's going to be starting this new thing called the New Deal that we'll talk about in detail next week. But he's going to be relying on Texans, John Nance Garner, people like Sam Rayburn, and folks like that to get it passed in the United States Congress. And that's going to usher in an absolutely new era, not just in Texas history, but in all of American history, which we'll get to talk about again next week. So I'm going to stop there and hand the mic over to my colleague, Michelle Phillips, and I'm going to dive into the chat, and I see it's been pretty active there. So Michelle.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Lots of great information, really fantastic active chat. So we appreciate that. Hope you guys are all doing well. I wanted to take a quick second to just echo what was said earlier by Brian about the Texas Originals. I use them in my own classroom to teach with. 7th graders respond incredibly well. I could imagine that 4th graders would as well. They are short, they're very sweet, but they are nice little compact pieces of information. And so it's really good for them to hear somebody else's voice instead of my own, or maybe yours sometimes. I don't know. Maybe your students love to hear your voice more so than anybody else's, but they need a break from mine sometimes. So anyways, good stuff, all fantastic stuff. And I hear that they are, oops, so sorry. I hear that they're gonna have some more. So that's really fantastic news. I'm gonna dive right into my lesson. I did a lesson all about the Dust Bowl in Texas. Listen, there are lots of lessons, quick little grab and go lessons about the Dust Bowl in Texas, but they're kind of dusty, no pun intended. And so I wanted to do something new and a little bit different than what's out there. Also, they're much like the grapes of wrath, everything's kind of fastened around that. And that's specifically about the impact on Oklahoma. And so we're looking more directly for some information in Texas. I'll start right here with this hook exercise. This one was really fun for me because I grabbed some pieces from Pampa, Texas, which is where I was born and raised up there in the Panhandle. Probably don't know or have not heard of it, but it is a small little ranch oil kind of town in the middle of the Panhandle, north of Amarillo, actually. And so they heavily experienced the Dust Bowl there. But somebody really fantastic was there during the Dust Bowl, and it was Woody Guthrie, famous Woody Guthrie. If you've never heard his songs, you will definitely enjoy it. You're probably gonna want to put some boots on and dance along. But Woody Guthrie wrote this fantastic song about the Dust Bowl, and I think that music is a really good way for students, for people, for humans to relate to stuff, and so relate to eras, relate emotionally, and so what I've done is I put the chorus, you can see I put the chorus inside of here, and then I put the clip of the sound of Woody Guthrie singing it. It's actually not a video, but it is the song. And so students have this graphic organizer. It's not a graphic organizer, actually, it's a printable student handout. And there are some questions in there about just analyzing songs. It asks them things like, why do you think he wrote the words that he wrote, or what kind of emotional connection is he trying to make, or what is he trying to make his audience understand about this era? So they're asked to do some of that, answer some of those questions. And then the next slide that I've got on this hook exercise is a quick, it's from Texas Archive of the Moving Image, and it is a silent, very short film of the Dust Bowl. It shows events from the Dust Bowl, and it shows people, like actual people, enduring these conditions. And so there's some guiding questions on the student handout as well. And I think I hope that seeing these live videos and hearing the music, students can really grab onto that and understand exactly what was going on. They help me, and I really don't think that you can teach the Dust Bowl without having some good photo resources. All right, moving on to the primary source analysis. Here's what I've done. It's broken down into 3 different parts. Number 1, because I want my students to know what natural features caused or impacted the Dust Bowl. And so that's what these 2 maps right here help them understand or help them analyze. And then the next part is the impact of the Dust Bowl. I grabbed, again, some pictures from the Panhandle. The first one's from Amarillo. And then the next one is really fantastic from Dorothea Lang. She really has, like, you guys have seen her work before, I'm positive, but she really has a unique perspective about the photographs that she took. And she had an emotional connection with a lot of these people, like a realistic, real emotional connection. If you've never heard her interviews or read through any of her interviews, I would highly suggest doing that. There's a little excerpt between the 2 of them, and just, it's really claiming, like, you know, there's nothing left. It's kind of hopeless. There's a lot of hopeless comments inside of that quote. And so the students will use that in the picture to analyze some of the feelings and emotions and events of the Great Depression, not the Great Depression, of the Dust Bowl. And then the very last piece is a news article about the very end of the Dust Bowl. They're seeing rain. They're feeling encouraged a little bit. This is the first time in 5 years that they've actually been encouraged by the weather. They're seeing less dust. But what do they do now? What's going to happen? And so it talks a lot about not a lot, a little about the loans given only to the farmers who now agree to farm scientifically. And so students, I want my students to understand exactly what this means. Like, what does the future of agriculture or farming mean for these people? They've never really been tied to a government really classification before. They just grew things and sold them, and their hands weren't very tied, but now they're probably going to be a little bit more tied, and so they can analyze those things through this little news clip. And one last piece that I've got for you guys is the exit ticket. The exit ticket is really just a scenario-based situation. I want to show you the bottom first, and then I'll bring you guys back up to the top. What I did was I gave the students a scenario and told them that it's 1983, end of the Dust Bowl era. They live in the Texas Panhandle, and they've, we're really just coming out of it. They've got to make a decision. Are you going to stay and farm, or are you going to head west with everybody else? Not with everybody else, but with others. And they've got to decide what their option is for their family's future. Give some reasoning down here. I gave them a place to write, but moving back up to option 1 and 2, they can analyze option 1 and 2 through photographs, because there's really no better way. So they've got a couple of options. You can lead them through this in whatever fashion you want to. You could simply use this kind of as an maybe even an intro, but this is a great exit ticket because it really introduces the end of the Dust Bowl era, and everybody was so glad about that. Anyways, that is all that I've got for you guys as far as lesson goes, lesson material. I wanted to point out though that Jay and I do link additional information to the bottom of our lesson plans. I've got some websites for you guys to check out at the very bottom, some book suggestions, and then a short little almanac video clip that's really comprehensive. I think it's a little over 3.5 minutes, but it's a really great and fantastic overview of the Dust Bowl. If your students are not understanding, or if you just need additional support for that era, I highly suggest that video.